Long before mammals swam in the sea, the oceans belonged to something else. A dynasty of air-breathing reptiles that ruled the tides for more than 180 million years, far longer than mammals have ruled the land or sea so far. They were not fish, they were not dinosaurs, they were not myths, they were land reptiles that returned to the water after the end Permian extinction cleared ecological space across the planet. Fossils trace their gradual transformation, legs flattening into flippers, spines reshaped for tail-driven propulsion, bones thickening or lightening for balance and buoyancy as bodies became streamlined for open ocean life. Some grew longer than a school bus, some carried skulls over 6 feet long, lined with teeth shaped like steak knives. Some had eyes larger than dinner plates, adapted for low-light hunting in deep water. Evidence reveals bite marks from one giant predator embedded in the bone of another, ribs broken and healed, skeletons preserved in combat. They breathed air, they had lungs, some gave birth in open water, never returning to land. Studies suggest certain species regulated body heat more effectively than most reptiles today, allowing long dives into depths where pressure would overwhelm many modern animals. Ichthyosaurs ranged across global seas, while pliosaurs rose as apex predators of the Jurassic, their massive jaws built for crushing force in ecosystems that stretched across warmer oceans, higher sea levels, and continents partly submerged beneath shallow seas. But how did reptiles conquer the sea so completely? What did those ancient oceans truly look like? How did these marine reptiles become so perfectly built for water, and what ended their dominance within a geological blink? Tonight, we drift slowly across vanished waters, where sea dragons once moved above continents that were still submerged. But before we begin, if you enjoy videos like this, slow, soothing, and softly filled with wonder, I'd love it if you gave this one a gentle like, and maybe tap subscribe. It helps more curious minds like you find their way to this peaceful little corner of the internet. And if you'd be so kind, let me know in the comments, where are you winding down from tonight, and what time is it there? It's always a joy to see how far across the world this little sleepy corner of science travels. So now take a deep breath, let your shoulders loosen, and let us sink slowly beneath the waves of a world ruled by sea dragons. At the margins where continents met the tide, the world lingered in a long, quiet aftermath. Shorelines stretched wide and empty, their sands unmarked by the crowded life that would come much later. The greatest dying the planet had known had already passed into stone, leaving coastlines with more space than inhabitants, and in that hush small reptilian forms began to wander, where waves folded gently over the land. They did not arrive as conquerors. They arrived as travelers, testing salt against skin, learning the slow rhythm of water that lifted and lowered their bodies with patient hands. At first the visits were brief, limbs still built for gravel and soil pressed cautiously into shallows, toes splaying as currents brushed between them. The sea offered food that did not flee across open ground, and each return brought longer forays. Generations passed with scarcely a boundary between land and water. Skeletons preserved in ancient sediments show wrists flattening, digits lengthening, joints loosening their old weight-bearing rigidity. Motion shifted from stepping to paddling, from lifting to gliding. Tails that once balanced bodies during walks began to sway with quiet purpose behind them, tracing soft S-curves through green water. The transformation unfolded with such patience that no single lifetime could have sensed it. Bodies grew sleeker, ribs narrowing their arcs so currents slipped past with less resistance. Bone within some species thickened like ballast, steadying them below the surface, while in others it lightened, allowing easier ascent through the water column. Nostrils edged upward along snouts, granting breath without the need to raise the whole head. Eyes settled into positions that watched both the dim below and the bright above. Each subtle alteration rested upon the last, like gentle tides layering sand into new shapes. By the early Triassic, forms now known as the first ichthyosaurs moved through coastal seas with assurance. Their outlines no longer resembled the creatures that had once stepped from dry ground. They carried the memory of that ancestry only in the hidden architecture of their bones. Fossils found in what were once lagoons and continental shelves reveal animals already committed to marine life, their limbs transformed into firm paddles, their spines flexing with the fluid grace of practiced swimmers. They followed schools of fish through warm shallows and out across open water, inhabitants of a realm that had begun to welcome them as its own. So the boundary between shore and sea softened, not through sudden change, but through countless quiet crossings until the distinction faded and a new lineage belonged wholly to the tides. Stone remembers what water remade. Within layers of ancient seabed now lifted into daylight, the bodies of these swimmers rest in mineral stillness, each skeleton a quiet record of motion refined across ages. Their earliest ancestors carried limbs suited for walking, yet the descendants preserved in these rocks display bones broadened and flattened, digits lengthened into graceful supports that once held sheets of muscle and skin. The shapes suggest neither feet nor hands, but structures shaped for pressure and lift, guiding movement through dense fluid rather than across solid ground. Along their spines, another change unfolded. Vertebrae aligned into supple chains that flexed from side to side, forming the foundation of powerful tails. In life, those tails bore vertical flukes of flesh that left no trace except the subtle architecture beneath them. The arrangement appears again and again in fossils scattered across distant continents, a pattern repeated with such consistency that the motion becomes almost visible, a steady undulation that carried bodies forward with tireless efficiency. Propulsion no longer depended on limbs alone. The axis of strength had shifted to the rear, where muscle and bone worked in quiet coordination. Inside those forms, density itself became a tool. Some skeletons show thickened bone walls, heavy as if shaped to resist buoyant lift, allowing their owners to remain submerged with little effort. Others reveal a lighter internal lattice, airy chambers sealed within mineralized struts, reducing mass so ascent required only a gentle stroke. Such variations hint at lives spent at different depths, each body tuned as carefully as an instrument, calibrated for its chosen layer of the sea. Evidence of birth drifts through this record as well. Certain fossils hold within their rib cages the delicate outlines of unborn young, tiny skeletons curled in positions that speak of development within the parent's body. Their presence confirms a life cycle freed from shorelines, where new generations entered the water already surrounded by it. No return to land disturbed their continuity. The ocean itself became cradle and horizon at once. Adaptations for descent appear in subtler signs. Rib shapes suggest lungs capable of compressing safely under pressure, while the proportions of eye sockets in some species imply vision suited to dim realms far below the surface shimmer. Even the chemistry locked inside fossilized bone preserves faint signatures of ancient dives, ratios of isotopes that shift according to depth and temperature, like whispers of journeys taken through layered water. Taken together, these remnants form a slow portrait of refinement. Nothing in them speaks of haste. Each alteration rests gently upon earlier forms, as though time itself guided the process with steady hands, shaping bodies that belonged not merely within the sea, but to it completely. Their silhouettes arrived first, swift forms cutting through ancient seas with a symmetry that spoke of effortless motion. Bodies tapered at both ends, narrow snouts leading and crescent tails following, a design that water accepted without resistance. Though their ancestry lay far from the waves, these swimmers bore an outline that would one day echo again in distant mammalian shapes, a convergence written not in kinship but in physics, where the laws of moving through liquid favored certain curves above all others. Skin and muscle have long since faded from their remains, yet the framework beneath tells its quiet account. Vertebrae stack in tight succession along the spine, forming a flexible column suited for steady lateral strokes. The tail base angles downward in many specimens, a subtle bend that once supported a vertical fluke. Such details appear in fossils recovered from strata scattered across nearly every continent, from polar sediments to rocks that formed in equatorial waters. Their distribution suggests not a local lineage, but travelers of immense range, inhabitants of a connected world, ocean whose currents carried life across vast distances. Within their skulls, the eye sockets widen into remarkable circles. Some measure nearly the span of a human dinner plate, ringed with delicate bony plates that once supported the eyeball against pressure. These structures imply sight adapted for dim realms where sunlight thinned into blue shadow. In several specimens, the proportions of the orbit exceed those of most other vertebrates, an anatomical investment in vision that hints at hunting grounds far below the surface shimmer. Chemical traces preserved in tooth enamel reinforce this impression, indicating repeated descents into cooler, deeper layers of water where few predators of their time could follow. Stomachs preserved in rare fossils hold the faint outlines of their meals. Scales of fish, hooks of squid-like cephalopods, and fragments of shelled swimmers lie clustered within the ribcage, undisturbed since the moment digestion ceased. Such contents place them not at the margins of marine communities, but within their living weave, mid-level hunters threading between smaller prey and larger rivals. Their speed would have allowed sudden bursts through schools, while their streamlined forms conserved energy during long pursuits across open water. As their numbers spread through the Triassic seas, they became familiar presences in ecosystems still recovering their richness. They did not dominate through brute force alone, but through refinement, balance, and reach. Across the planet's waters, their shapes repeated, silent signatures of a lineage that had settled fully into its element, moving with the calm assurance of creatures shaped by currents and time alike. In the middle span of the Jurassic, scale itself seemed to deepen, as though the oceans had learned a new dimension and began shaping creatures to match it. Through those waters moved pliosaurs, bodies vast and deliberate, their presence altering the balance around them the way a great current alters drifting kelp. They did not rely on speed alone. Their strength lived foremost in the architecture of the head, where bone gathered into immense frameworks that formed some of the largest skulls known from any marine reptile. These skulls stretched longer than the height of many people, their jaws lined with conical teeth thick as carved ivory. Muscle scars etched along fossilized bone reveal the anchoring points of powerful tissues that once closed those jaws with tremendous force. Biomechanical studies of their proportions suggest bites capable of crushing dense flesh and splintering bone, a pressure delivered not in haste but with steady certainty. When such a mouth opened, it created a silhouette broad enough to swallow sizable prey in a single motion, leaving little chance for escape once seized. Traces of their encounters remain preserved in the bodies of other ancient swimmers. Skeletons of smaller marine reptiles bear punctures spaced in patterns that match pliosaur dentition, while some bones show deep gouges where enamel once pressed and slid. A few fossils even hold broken teeth embedded within them, fragments lost during violent struggles and sealed into place as sediments gathered. These quiet records speak of direct confrontations, not imagined but recorded in mineral detail, moments of pursuit and capture translated into the language of stone. Their dominance extended beyond individual hunts. In marine deposits from this era, the largest carnivorous remains often belong to these animals, suggesting a role at the summit of their ecosystems. Around them lived fish, shelled cephalopods, and other reptiles of varied design, yet the proportions preserved in fossil assemblages indicate that few rivals matched their combination of size and strength. Some species reached lengths comparable to modern buses, their bodies supported by four strong flippers that guided them with controlled authority through open water. Even in stillness, their fossils convey mass. Vertebrae as wide as serving plates lie stacked in sequence, and jawbones rest like sculpted beams within the rock. When assembled in museum halls, their skeletons stretch across entire rooms, offering a quiet sense of magnitude that numbers alone cannot hold. In life, they would have moved with slow confidence, sovereign forms shaped by an ocean that, for a long interval of Earth's history, carried giants as its most familiar rulers. Light filtered down through Jurassic water in long, pale columns, touching a seafloor alive with motion so delicate it might have seemed like drifting petals to a distant observer. Shells coiled in perfect spirals turned slowly in the gentle currents, their chambers filled with gas and liquid in quiet balance. These were ammonites, countless in number, their patterned homes etched with ridges that caught faint glimmers from above. They hovered and adjusted with subtle pulses, neither sinking nor rising far, as if the sea itself were breathing them into place. Nearby moved the belemnites, slender and soft-bodied, their shapes more like living arrows than shells. At their rear extended solid internal guards of calcite, weighty anchors hidden within flesh, helping steady their passage as they drifted and darted. When they gathered in groups, they formed shifting constellations, each individual turning with fluid precision. Though their bodies vanished long ago, those inner guards remain scattered through limestone today, quiet traces of once living schools that filled the water with silent motion. Reefs stretched across warm shallows and broad terraces, built not only by corals, but by sponges, bryozoans, and colonies of organisms whose tiny forms joined to create living stone. Their structures rose in layered shelves and rounded mounds, providing shelter for creatures that crept, clung, and waved, feeding limbs into the passing flow. Feather stars anchored themselves lightly, arms unfurled like branching frost, while crustaceans traced careful paths between coral towers. Every surface held life, each crevice a small dwelling shaped by patience and time. The warmth of these seas differed from those of the present age. Polar ice lay absent, and temperatures spread more evenly from equator to pole, allowing marine communities to flourish across latitudes that today would lie chilled beneath seasonal dark. Waters carried minerals in different proportions, lending ancient shells a chemistry distinct from their modern counterparts. Even the tides moved across a planet whose continents rested in unfamiliar positions, their coastlines arranged in patterns now dissolved by drifting plates. Broad inland seas covered portions of land that would one day stand as mountains or plains, and through those shallow expanses, marine life spread in luminous abundance. Within this world, movement rarely ceased. Small forms grazed upon drifting plankton, larger ones followed in gentle pursuit, and above them all, the open water remained wide and unbroken. It was an ocean filled not with emptiness, but with layered presence, a living tapestry woven from shell, fin, tentacle, and reef, extending across a globe whose face was still arranging itself beneath the patient guidance of deep time. Length appeared to drift through the water before the body itself followed. In certain regions of the ancient sea, A slender line would emerge from the blue distance, extending slowly until it resolved into a living neck of astonishing reach. At its far end rested a small head, poised with delicate precision, while far behind it, the main body advanced with measured strokes of four broad flippers. These were the elasmosaurid plesiosaurs, whose proportions seemed to separate them into two creatures, joined in quiet agreement, one guiding, the other propelling. Their necks contained dozens of vertebrae, each short and gently articulated, forming a flexible column that curved with smooth restraint rather than sudden bends. Early naturalists once imagined these animals lifting those long spans high above the surface like serpents, yet the structure of the joints tells another story. The bones allow graceful lateral motion, but restrict sharp vertical arches, suggesting a neck carried mostly through water, weaving softly rather than rising. Modern study of their articulation shows a design suited not for dramatic display, but for controlled placement of the head within the surrounding space. That reach granted a subtle advantage during the hunt. The body could remain distant while the small skull approached schools of fish or drifting cephalopods with minimal disturbance. Instead of lunging with speed alone, they may have relied on stillness, easing the head forward until prey lay within range of narrow jaws lined with fine teeth. The strategy resembles the patience of certain modern hunters that close distance without ripples, allowing curiosity or inattention to draw quarry nearer. Fossil stomach contents, containing small aquatic animals, support this quieter method, indicating meals that required precision rather than crushing force. Movement came from the coordinated action of all four limbs. Unlike later swimmers that depended chiefly on tails, these reptiles flew through water with synchronized strokes, front and rear flippers sweeping in alternating rhythms. Computer modeling of their limb motion suggests a pattern similar to underwater flight, producing lift as well as thrust, so the body glided between strokes. The long neck, though striking in outline, formed only a small portion of total mass and likely trailed with gentle adjustments, stabilized by muscles that kept its motion smooth and economical. For many years, reconstructions placed the head incorrectly, bending the neck into swan-like curves that the vertebrae themselves could never sustain. Careful examination of fossil alignment gradually corrected these images, restoring a posture more level and fluid. As new specimens emerged from rock, each added detail refined the portrait, replacing speculation with forms grounded in anatomy. Through such patient revision, the image of these hunters settled into clarity, not as exaggerated marvels, but as living designs shaped with quiet precision for their place within the ancient sea. Breath marked their lives in rhythms older than memory. Far below the surface, muscles worked in silence, and the body moved with steady purpose, yet always there remained an unseen thread connecting them to the sky above. Within their chests lay lungs shaped for a world divided between water and air, organs that expanded with calm fullness when they rose and folded again as they descended into dimmer layers. Each inhalation carried a reserve of oxygen gathered in moments at the surface, a quiet store that sustained them through long passages below. Fossil ribs offer subtle testimony to this hidden cycle. In many specimens, the bones curve in wide arcs, forming a barrel-like chest that would have housed lungs of considerable volume. The spacing between ribs suggests flexibility rather than rigidity, allowing the thorax to expand deeply with each breath. Some skeletons show reinforced rib joints, a structure that may have helped withstand pressure as depth increased and the surrounding water pressed inward. These details, preserved in mineral form, reveal bodies prepared not only for swimming, but for the management of air itself. Their surfacing likely followed gentle intervals rather than hurried returns. By conserving energy in their movements, they reduced the need for frequent ascent. Streamlined shapes, lowered resistance, and coordinated muscles distributed effort evenly through the body, so each stroke carried them farther with less cost. Such efficiency echoes patterns seen in modern whales and seals, whose dives unfold in measured cycles of descent, glide, and return. Though separated by vast spans of time and ancestry, both share solutions shaped by the same physical laws governing breath and buoyancy. Inside their blood and tissues, chemistry would have played its part as well. Elevated concentrations of oxygen-binding molecules, inferred from comparisons with living divers, may have allowed these reptiles to store greater supplies within muscle and bloodstream. This internal reservoir would extend their time below, permitting them to travel or forage without haste. Even their posture while swimming could assist, as certain body angles reduce drag and conserve momentum, allowing forward motion to continue long after a stroke has ended. When at last they approach the surface, the ascent may have been unhurried, a gradual rise through brightening layers until the boundary above met them. A brief emergence, a breath drawn and released, then the body tilting downward once more, returning to the vast medium that shaped every contour of its form. In this way, their lives unfolded between two realms, guided by lungs that linked the open air with the silent depths, sustaining creatures perfectly attuned to both. Marks remain where ancient struggles once unfolded, faint impressions pressed into bone long before stone enclosed them. Along ribs, vertebrae, and flippers, curved indentations trace the arc of teeth that met living flesh in brief collisions of strength. These scars do not speak with noise or motion now, yet their shapes preserve the geometry of encounters, each groove matching the spacing and size of jaws known from nearby fossils. Through such quiet correspondences, moments of pursuit and resistance linger in mineral stillness. Some skeletons carry more than marks. Within the abdominal region of certain specimens lie clusters of bones that do not belong to the body that holds them. Small vertebrae, fragments of limb, or the delicate outlines of fish rest gathered inside the rib cage, their arrangement suggesting the last meal taken before burial. In rare cases, the remains belong to other marine reptiles, their partial forms enclosed within a larger predator. These preserved contents reveal relationships once hidden beneath the surface, where hunter and hunted moved through overlapping paths in the same wide waters. Not all encounters joined different species. Evidence etched into fossils shows that members of the same lineage sometimes met in conflict. Tooth impressions matching identical jaw shapes appear on bones of similar size and structure, indicating struggles between rivals of their own kind. Such traces may record contests over territory or access to prey, brief confrontations resolved in flashes of force. A healed fracture along one specimen's side shows that survival sometimes followed these clashes, bone knitting slowly while the animal continued its life beneath the waves. In a few extraordinary finds, the story grows even more intimate. Remains of juveniles have been discovered within the body cavities of larger individuals of the same species, their proportions too small to be mistaken for adults. Whether these young were taken as prey or consumed after death cannot always be known, yet their presence confirms that feeding did not always distinguish between kin and stranger. In ecosystems where opportunity shaped survival, nourishment could come from any source encountered. These interactions unfolded within layered communities where many hunters shared the same realm. Differences in size, jaw form, swimming style, and preferred depth allowed several predators to exist without constant overlap. Some specialized in swift prey near the surface, others in slower animals below, while still others may have followed migrating schools across open expanses. The fossil record preserves hints of this balance, showing distinct tooth shapes suited to piercing, slicing, or crushing, each design aligned with particular meals. So the ancient seas held not a single ruler, but a shifting constellation of hunters, their lives intersecting in patterns both fleeting and enduring. Within stone, their traces remain side by side, silent records of a world where survival unfolded through encounters written delicately into bone. Temperatures once held the planet in a long, gentle warmth, a span of ages when cold did not gather at the poles and ice found no lasting place to rest. During this Cretaceous interval, heat moved freely through air and sea alike, smoothing the contrast between equator and high latitude so that waters far north and south remained mild through all seasons. Coastlines did not end where they stand now. Seas spread outward across continents, filling low regions and basins until shorelines traced new shapes across the globe. With so much water pooled upon the land, shallow inland seas formed broad corridors that connected distant regions. These sunlit expanses warmed quickly and retained their heat, creating vast habitats where marine life could travel without encountering abrupt thermal barriers. Fossil distributions show that many reptiles ranged across astonishing distances during this time, their remains appearing in rock layers laid down thousands of miles apart. Such patterns suggest oceans that welcomed movement rather than restricting it, their temperatures and currents offering few obstacles to creatures adapted for open water. The chemistry of those seas differed as well. Dissolved minerals circulated in proportions unlike those of later ages, influenced by active seafloor spreading and volcanic outpourings that released elements into the water. Microscopic organisms drifting near the surface built shells from these minerals, and when they settled, they formed sediments that slowly compressed into chalk and limestone. Within those pale stones lie the scattered bones and teeth of the reptiles that shared their environment, preserved together in deposits shaped by both biology and climate. Absence of polar ice also meant higher sea levels across the world. Without massive glaciers to store water on land, the oceans expanded, covering continental margins beneath layers of shifting blue. Coral communities and other reef builders extended along these submerged edges, creating intricate habitats that supported fish, mollusks, and crustaceans in remarkable variety. Such richness provided steady nourishment for larger hunters, allowing populations of marine reptiles to flourish across regions that might otherwise have offered only sparse resources. Climate guided their presence as surely as anatomy did. Species with preferences for warmer conditions appear most often in sediments that formed near ancient tropics, while others tolerated broader ranges and left traces from multiple latitudes. Isotopic signatures within fossilized bone record the temperatures of the waters they inhabited, a subtle imprint of environment carried within their own structure. Through these clues, the ancient seas reveal themselves not as uniform expanses, but as layered realms shaped by sunlight, depth, and circulation. In that greenhouse world, warmth acted as an unseen architect, arranging currents, coastlines, and habitats into patterns that favored marine reptiles for millions of years. Their distribution across the globe reflects this quiet guidance, a testament to how profoundly climate can shape the paths life follows through time. Along certain ancient shorelines, impressions of scaled feet once pressed briefly into wet sediment before vanishing beneath incoming tides. Those traces belonged to reptiles whose ancestors had walked dry ground, creatures built with limbs and joints suited for land, yet drawn again toward the open sea. Over many generations, their descendants changed in quiet increments, bodies lengthening, limbs reshaping into broad paddles, tails expanding into deep vertical fins that swept the water with deliberate strength. In time, these swimmers would be known as mosasaurs, and their forms would come to define the closing chapter of reptilian rule in the oceans. Their lineage began among terrestrial lizards, relatives of animals that still bask on rocks today. Fossils preserving early stages show skeletons that retain hints of that ancestry, with hips and shoulders not yet fully transformed, and limbs that still suggest weight once carried against gravity. Later specimens reveal a different design. The spine extends farther, the tail vertebrae tilt to support a crescent fluke, and the bones of the limbs flatten and shorten, forming firm blades that guided direction rather than propelled it. Movement shifted toward the rear of the body, where powerful muscles drove the tail in sweeping motions that produced steady thrust. These anatomical changes appear in rocks from widely separated regions, indicating a distribution that spanned much of the globe. Remains of mosasaurs have been uncovered in sediments that formed in ancient inland seas, along continental margins, and within deposits that once lay far offshore. Such a record suggests animals capable of long journeys across connected waters, following prey through corridors that linked distant habitats. Their presence in many marine environments points to adaptability as well as strength, qualities that allowed them to flourish as other reptilian groups declined. The structure of their jaws offers insight into their feeding habits. Teeth curve slightly backward and bear smooth enamel surfaces, a shape well suited for gripping, slippery prey. Some skulls preserve stomach contents that include fish, ammonites, and even fragments of other marine reptiles, indicating a varied diet gathered through active pursuit. The proportions of their bodies, long and streamlined, further support this image. Hydrodynamic modeling of their form shows reduced drag and efficient acceleration, traits consistent with hunters that relied on speed to close distance. Within the late Cretaceous seas, they grew into many sizes, from modest forms to giants whose length rivaled that of small boats. As their diversity expanded, so did their influence, until their silhouettes became familiar across vast stretches of ocean. Their rise did not occur in sudden conquest, but through gradual refinement, each generation carrying slight advantages that accumulated across time. In this way, the descendants of shoreline wanderers became masters of open water, their passage written into stone layers scattered across the planet, quiet testimony to a lineage that found its fullest expression in the moving sea. Far below the sunlit surface, the sea descends through veils of dimming blue into regions where light thins to a faint haze. In those depths, certain marine reptiles traveled with quiet assurance, their bodies shaped for conditions very different from the bright waters above. Fossils of these divers reveal skulls dominated by enormous eye sockets, circular openings that once housed eyes of remarkable size. Within some specimens, delicate rings of bone still rest inside the orbit, structures that would have supported the eyeball against surrounding pressure. Such features suggest vision adapted for shadowed environments where illumination was scarce and every trace of light carried value. These animals likely moved between layers of the ocean rather than remaining at a single depth. Evidence from their bones hints at patterns of vertical migration, slow descents followed by gradual returns. The chemistry locked within fossilized tissue preserves ratios of oxygen isotopes that vary according to temperature, and those ratios sometimes indicate exposure to both warmer surface water and cooler depths. This dual signature implies lives spent traveling through the column of the sea, perhaps following prey that shifted position with changing light or time of day. Modern deep-diving mammals offer a distant parallel. Creatures such as sperm whales and elephant seals descend thousands of feet using physiological adaptations that manage oxygen, pressure, and buoyancy. Though separated by immense spans of evolutionary history, the reptiles of the ancient oceans appear to have developed their own solutions to similar challenges. Their large eyes would gather faint light, while the structure of their bones suggests bodies capable of withstanding compression during prolonged submergence. Comparisons of skeletal density indicate that some species possessed heavier frameworks, a trait that could aid descent by counteracting natural buoyancy. The shape of certain skulls also hints at sensory refinement beyond sight. Expanded canals within the snout region may have housed nerves attuned to vibration, allowing detection of movement through water even in near darkness. Such sensitivity would prove valuable where vision alone could not guide a hunt. In these dim layers, motion becomes a language carried through subtle shifts in pressure and current, and a hunter able to interpret those signals would move with quiet confidence. Distribution of these fossils across ancient seabeds shows that deep, capable species appeared in multiple regions of the world, not confined to a single basin or climate. Their presence in sediments formed far from ancient shorelines suggests animals comfortable in open ocean settings, descending into depths that lay beyond the reach of many contemporaries. Through these traces, a portrait emerges of reptiles that explored the sea not only across its breadth, but through its vertical expanse, inhabiting a realm layered from brightness to darkness, each level offering its own stillness and life. Within certain stone slabs, time holds a quieter scene, one not of pursuit or motion, but of beginnings. There lie fossils in which a larger skeleton encloses smaller forms curled inside its body cavity, their tiny vertebrae aligned, their limbs folded close. These delicate shapes are not prey, nor fragments carried by current, but unborn young preserved at the moment life paused. Their presence reveals that some marine reptiles brought forth their offspring directly into the water, their lineage continuing without any return to shore. The arrangement of these embryos offers careful clues. In several specimens, the young lie positioned tail first, an orientation known among modern aquatic animals that reduces risk during birth. Such detail suggests that this method of reproduction was not accidental, but refined through generations, shaped by natural selection toward safer delivery in a fluid environment. The bones of the developing young show incomplete ossification, their surfaces softer and less mineralized than those of adults, a reminder of their early stage and of the protective space they once occupied. Because they did not need land for nesting, these reptiles were free to inhabit regions far from any coastline. Fossils of pregnant individuals have been discovered in deposits that formed in ancient offshore basins, indicating lives spent entirely at sea. Their young would have entered the world already surrounded by water, capable of swimming from the first moments, guided by instinct and the subtle movements of nearby adults. Such independence at birth mirrors patterns seen in certain marine mammals today, where newborns must quickly match the pace of their mothers to remain within reach. The possibility of social behavior lingers in these findings as well. Groups of individuals preserved together in the same sediment layer hint that some species may have traveled in loose assemblies rather than alone. If so, birth within the water column could occur among companions, a setting where multiple adults moved nearby, their presence offering protection through number and awareness. Though stone cannot record sound or gesture, The clustering of fossils suggests lives that occasionally overlapped, paths crossing in shared spaces of the open sea. Inside each preserved skeleton rests a quiet continuity, a record of life carried within life. These fossils do not display motion, yet they hold a sense of unfolding, as though the ancient ocean still cradles the moment they represent. Through them, it becomes clear that for many marine reptiles, the sea was not merely a hunting ground or a place of passage. It was also a nursery, a realm where new generations began their first movements beneath the surface, sustained from the beginning by the same vast waters that shaped their kind. Drifting almost invisibly through ancient seas were the smallest architects of abundance, countless plankton suspended like living dust within the water. Though minute, they formed the quiet foundation upon which entire ecosystems rested. Sunlight filtering from above fed microscopic algae that turned radiance into nourishment, and these tiny cells multiplied in numbers beyond measure. In their presence, the water itself became a field of sustenance, sustaining creatures so small they seemed scarcely more than motion, which in turn sustained larger bodies moving patiently through the same currents. From this delicate beginning rose a widening ladder of life. Small fish gathered where plankton bloomed, their slender forms flashing as they fed in coordinated schools. Over long spans of time, these fishes diversified into a remarkable array of shapes, fins adapting for hovering, darting, or steady cruising. Fossil deposits preserve their scales and skeletons in fine detail, revealing lineages that branched and spread through varied habitats, each form occupying its own place within the layered structure of the sea. Among them moved cephalopods, soft-bodied hunters whose tentacles trailed like ribbons as they navigated the water column. Some carried coiled or chambered shells, others bore internal supports hidden within their flesh, and still others possessed bodies built entirely of muscle and nerve. Their large eyes and flexible limbs allowed them to seize prey with sudden precision, making them vital intermediaries in the transfer of energy from smaller swimmers to larger predators. Ink sacs preserved in rare fossils hint at their defenses, a final cloud released in moments of danger long vanished. These relationships formed what scientists call trophic levels, a sequence through which energy passed from one form of life to another. The term may sound clinical, yet it describes a pattern as fluid as the sea itself, a continuous exchange in which each organism both receives and gives. No creature stood entirely alone. Even the most formidable hunters depended upon the quiet productivity of plankton far below their notice, and any shift at that unseen foundation could ripple upward through every level above. Such systems carried both resilience and fragility. When conditions remained steady, populations balanced one another, numbers rising and falling in gentle cycles that kept the whole in motion. Yet when currents changed or chemistry shifted, the smallest inhabitants often responded first, and their decline could echo through fish, cephalopods, and reptiles alike. The ancient oceans held immense life, but that abundance rested upon threads as fine as drifting cells, each one part of a vast living tapestry woven from light, water, and time. Continents seldom remain where they begin. Over spans too vast for memory, the surface of the planet rearranges itself with slow determination, land masses gliding atop the deeper mantle like great rafts carried by currents no eye can see. In earlier ages, much of the world's land had rested together in a single vast assembly, but as time unfolded, that union loosened. Rifts opened, subtle at first, then widening year by year until the ancient supercontinent separated into drifting fragments that moved gradually apart. As these divisions widened, water entered the spaces between. Narrow channels became seaways, and seaways broadened into young oceans whose floors were newly formed and still warm beneath. Along the edges of the separating continents, low regions sank slightly under their own weight, allowing shallow waters to spread across them. These submerged margins formed extensive coastal plains beneath the surface, illuminated by sunlight that reached easily to the bottom. Such regions became fertile grounds for marine life, their gentle depths offering shelter, warmth, and abundant nutrients carried by tides. Yet separation brought more than new habitat. Populations that once mingled freely found themselves divided by widening distances. A species that had ranged across a continuous shoreline might now exist in scattered groups, each confined to a different fragment of land or basin of sea. With time, these isolated communities followed their own evolutionary paths. Slight variations in temperature, salinity, or available prey encouraged different traits, and generation after generation, these distinctions accumulated. Bones preserved in successive rock layers show gradual divergence, subtle at first, then unmistakable, as forms that shared a common ancestry became distinct species shaped by their particular surroundings. Fossil distributions reveal this pattern with quiet clarity. Closely related marine reptiles appear in deposits laid down on continents that were once joined but later separated by thousands of miles. Their similarities speak of an earlier unity, while their differences record the long interval since their populations parted. In this way, stone preserves not only the creatures themselves, but the history of the world's shifting surface, each skeleton a marker placed along a map that changed as it was drawn. The motion of continents also influenced currents that traveled through the seas. As land masses drifted, they redirected the flow of water, altering pathways that carried heat and nutrients from one region to another. These changes affected which habitats flourished and which grew sparse, subtly guiding where marine reptiles and their prey could thrive. Over millions of years, the arrangement of land and sea continued to evolve, shaping environments with patient persistence. Thus, the drifting of continents acted as a quiet architect, rearranging coastlines, dividing populations, and opening new realms for life to explore. The creatures of those ancient oceans lived within a world never fixed, their histories intertwined with the slow choreography of stone and water moving together through deep time. Before any mammal voice ever carried through salt water, the oceans possessed a different kind of hush. It was not silence, but a soundscape shaped by wind, shifting currents, and the subtle friction of water moving across itself. Without the long traveling calls of whales or the sharp clicks of dolphins, the dominant tones would have arisen from physical forces rather than deliberate signals. Waves breaking against distant shores released low, rolling vibrations that traveled outward through the sea, their pulses fading gradually as they crossed open distances. Storms added deeper notes. When ancient winds swept across the surface, they stirred broad swells whose energy passed downward in slow oscillations. These motions produced a constant background murmur, a resonance felt as much as heard, filling the water column with gentle pressure changes. In regions where continents lay arranged differently than today, coastlines altered how waves reflected and refracted, shaping patterns of sound unique to each basin. Some areas would have held steady rhythms, while others carried shifting interference where currents and tides met. Within this acoustic world, marine reptiles and their prey relied on senses attuned to vibration. Though their ears were not built for airborne sound, their skulls and inner ear structures suggest sensitivity to low-frequency movement transmitted through water. Subtle ripples created by a swimming animal could travel considerable distances, offering clues to its direction and speed. A hunter capable of detecting such signals might orient itself without sight, guided by faint disturbances spreading through the surrounding medium. Prey species possessed their own awareness. Fish and other swimmers carried lateral line systems, rows of sensory cells along the body that registered minute changes in pressure. These organs allowed them to perceive approaching motion even when the source remained hidden. In such an environment, survival often depended upon interpreting vibrations correctly, distinguishing the steady rhythm of waves from the purposeful displacement caused by another creature's passage. The ocean thus became a field of information conveyed through motion rather than voice. The absence of loud biological calls may have granted these waters a more uniform acoustic texture. Instead of sharp bursts or patterned songs, the dominant sounds would have blended into continuous layers, shaped by weather, geography, and the movements of countless animals passing through. Even large predators, moving swiftly, would produce only brief disturbances, their presence marked by a shifting wake rather than sustained noise. Over time, as life evolved new forms and new behaviors, the ocean's voice would change, yet during those earlier ages, its character remained grounded in natural resonance. It was a realm where sound flowed from wind and wave, from fin and current, creating an ever-present tapestry of vibration that surrounded every creature moving within it, a quiet language shared by water and life alike. Weight gathers quietly with depth. Every descent through the sea adds another layer of pressure, an invisible burden that settles upon skin, muscle, and bone alike. Near the surface, the change is gentle, scarcely noticed, yet farther below the force increases steadily until each part of the body must endure a surrounding embrace far stronger than anything known on land. For creatures that ventured into these regions, survival depended upon structures capable of yielding and supporting at once. Fossilized skeletons offer glimpses of how certain marine reptiles met this challenge. Some display ribs that curve smoothly rather than sharply, forming torsos shaped to distribute force evenly across their frame. Others show vertebrae packed closely together, reducing empty space within the body and providing stability against compression. The density of bone varies among species, suggesting different tolerances for depth. Heavier skeletal walls may have helped resist collapse under pressure, while lighter frameworks indicate forms that remained within shallower ranges where such reinforcement was unnecessary. These patterns resemble, in distant parallel, the adaptations of modern diving mammals. Whales and seals possess flexible rib cages that compress safely during descent, protecting lungs from damage as surrounding pressure rises. Though separated by vast spans of evolutionary time, the reptiles of earlier seas appear to have followed similar physical principles. Their bodies show signs of structural balance, combining strength with a measure of resilience that allowed tissues to endure gradual squeezing without harm. Limits still existed. Even the most capable divers could not descend indefinitely, for beyond certain depths, the strain upon organs would grow too great. Evidence for these boundaries appears in the geological settings where their fossils are found. Species with denser bones often occur in sediments that formed in deeper marine environments, while those with lighter skeletons appear more frequently in deposits laid down in shallower basins. Such distribution suggests that each lineage occupied a preferred vertical range, shaped by anatomy as much as by habit. Within those ranges, Movement through the water column likely followed measured patterns. A descent might begin with steady strokes, then shift into a glide as momentum carried the body downward. At depth, the animal would remain for a time, gathering food or traversing its territory, before turning upward in a controlled ascent that allowed internal gases to adjust safely. This rhythm of descent and return formed a quiet cycle repeated throughout life, a pattern written not in sound or light but in pressure, endured and released. Through these anatomical traces and geological clues, the ancient ocean reveals itself as a layered realm where depth was both pathway and boundary. The reptiles that traveled there did so within limits set by physics, their forms reflecting the delicate negotiation between strength and flexibility required to move through a world that pressed gently, then firmly, then with unyielding persistence, the farther one sank. Long before their silhouettes became familiar in modern seas, swift shapes with cartilaginous skeletons already traced deliberate paths through ancient waters. Among them were early lamniform sharks, streamlined hunters whose lineage would one day include some of the most formidable predators known. Their bodies carried a different design from the reptiles that shared their realm, yet they moved with comparable assurance, tails sweeping side to side in steady propulsion, senses attuned to faint electrical signals and distant vibrations. Where such creatures passed, the water bore witness to another kind of mastery, one rooted not in bone, but in flexible cartilage, strengthened by subtle mineral reinforcement. As their numbers increased during later Mesozoic ages, their presence overlapped with that of marine reptiles, occupying similar feeding grounds. Both groups pursued fish and cephalopods. Both relied on speed and sensory acuity, and both ranged across wide territories in search of sustenance. This convergence created a quiet competition shaped not by constant confrontation, but by shared reliance on the same resources. Fossil assemblages sometimes preserve their remains within the same sediment layers, indicating that they inhabited the same waters, their lives unfolding side by side within the same ecological stage. Occasionally, the stone record preserves more direct signs of interaction. Teeth attributed to lamniform sharks have been found embedded in reptilian bones, their serrated edges leaving unmistakable impressions. Some of these marks show healing, suggesting encounters survived, while others appear on fragments separated from the rest of the skeleton, hinting at feeding after death. Such traces reveal moments when paths crossed closely enough for tooth and scale to meet, brief contacts preserved as lasting signatures in mineral form. Despite these encounters, neither group displaced the other during long stretches of time. Each possessed strengths suited to particular circumstances. Sharks, with their lightweight skeletons and continuously replaced teeth, could maintain sharp cutting edges and efficient swimming with relatively little energy. Marine reptiles, by contrast, often carried heavier frames and lungs that allowed prolonged dives, granting access to depths or durations beyond the reach of many fish. Differences in physiology and behavior helped partition their shared environment, reducing constant conflict while still allowing occasional overlap. Distribution patterns in fossil deposits reflect this balance. Regions rich in reptilian remains often also yield shark teeth scattered through the same strata, silent confirmation that both thrived within those ecosystems. Rather than a single dominant hunter, the seas supported multiple lineages, each adapted to its own method of pursuit. Through this coexistence, the ancient oceans held a layered predator community, its members distinct yet intertwined. In that world of parallel hunters, survival depended less on rivalry alone than on adaptability. Sharks and reptiles alike navigated shifting conditions, their forms refined by different solutions to the same elemental challenge of moving, sensing, and feeding within the vast and ever-changing sea. A different lineage began to gather along certain ancient coasts as the ages turned, its members shaped not by scales or reptilian bone, but by furred ancestors whose lives had long unfolded on land. These early mammals approached the water gradually, their forms still carrying traces of a terrestrial past, even as their habits shifted toward the tides. Among them were the archaeocetes, a group whose fossils record one of the most delicate transformations preserved in stone, a transition written across skeletons that seem poised between two worlds. The earliest of these creatures retained sturdy limbs and flexible spines suited for walking, yet their bones also reveal subtle adjustments for swimming. Their toes lengthened, joints loosened, and tails strengthened, suggesting bodies learning new patterns of motion. Over successive generations, their hind limbs diminished, their bodies elongated, and their vertebrae arranged themselves into shapes better suited for propulsion through water. Each specimen, found in layered sediments, marks a step along this gradual path, showing how small anatomical shifts accumulated until movement through the sea became their primary mode of life. This transformation unfolded during the Eocene, a span of time when climates remained warm and seas extended widely across the continents. Fossils of archaeocetes appear in deposits from regions that once bordered ancient shorelines, indicating that these mammals first occupied coastal waters and shallow basins. There they likely fed on fish and invertebrates, navigating environments already inhabited by long-established reptilian swimmers. For a time, both lineages shared the same broad habitats, their lives overlapping without immediate displacement. Differences in physiology slowly shaped new possibilities. Mammals carried internal systems capable of sustaining stable body temperatures, allowing activity across a wider range of conditions. Their lungs and circulatory structures supported prolonged movement, while their developing tail-driven propulsion offered efficient travel through open water. As generations passed, these traits became more pronounced, and later archaeocetes show bodies increasingly streamlined with reduced hind limbs and stronger tail regions. Their nostrils shifted position along the skull, an early stage of the blowhole arrangement seen in their descendants. The fossil record suggests that this emergence did not bring sudden change, but a gradual reshaping of marine communities. Marine reptiles continued to inhabit the oceans for long intervals, yet alongside them appeared these mammalian newcomers, each generation slightly more adapted to aquatic life. Sedimentary layers reveal this overlap, preserving bones of both groups within the same geological horizons, quiet evidence of a world where dominance was beginning to shift, yet had not fully changed hands. Through such patient transitions, the seas witnessed the rise of a new kind of swimmer, one whose ancestry traced back to land, but whose future would unfold almost entirely within water. The appearance of archaeocetes marked not an abrupt ending for those who came before, but the opening of another lineage's long relationship with the ocean, a transformation carried forward in silence through the steady passage of time. Far out in space, a fragment of ancient rock followed its quiet orbit for ages, beyond counting, until gravity altered its path and drew it inward toward the sunlit worlds. When at last it met the Earth, it did so with a force that surpassed any storm or tide the planet had known. The impact occurred near what is now the Yucatan region, where the Chicxulub crater still rests beneath younger layers of stone, its buried rim a lasting imprint of that single moment. The collision released energy on a scale difficult to imagine. Rock vaporized, seawater surged outward, and shock waves rippled through crust and ocean alike. Along distant coastlines, walls of water rose and traveled across basins, tsunamis spreading through connected seas with long rolling motion. Sediments laid down at that boundary preserve chaotic deposits, layers where marine sand, shattered shells, and fragments of land plants lie mingled together, as if the surface world and the ocean floor had briefly traded places. Above the water, debris thrown into the atmosphere darkened the sky. Fine particles drifted downward over weeks and months, settling slowly through the sea and dimming the sunlight that sustained microscopic algae. Without that steady radiance, plankton populations declined, and with them, the foundation of marine food webs weakened. Creatures that depended directly upon these tiny producers found less to eat, and those that relied upon them in turn faced growing scarcity. The disruption moved upward through each level of life, a chain of effects unfolding with quiet persistence rather than sudden noise. Geological layers formed at this time record the transition with remarkable clarity. A thin band, rich in iridium, an element more common in extraterrestrial rock than in Earth's crust, appears worldwide within sediments of the same age. Beneath that band lie fossils of species that had thrived for millions of years. Above it, many of those forms vanish, replaced by different assemblages that reflect a changed world. This boundary, preserved in cliffs and cores alike, marks the dividing line between eras shaped by different inhabitants. Among those absent above the layer are the great marine reptiles that had long moved through the oceans. Their remains grow scarce and then cease entirely in younger deposits, indicating that the aftermath of the impact proved too severe for their survival. Changes in temperature, chemistry, and available food combined into pressures their bodies could not withstand. While some smaller organisms endured and later flourished, these larger rulers of ancient seas passed quietly from the record. The stone remembers this turning. Within its strata lies the story of a single celestial encounter that altered currents of life across the globe, a moment when forces from beyond the earth reshaped the destinies of creatures within it, leaving behind a boundary as thin as a page, yet as profound as an ending written in silence. Stillness settled across the seas in the long interval that followed, not the gentle quiet of drifting water, but a wider hush that lingered through years and centuries. Where once great bodies had crossed vast distances, the open expanse now held fewer travelers. Sediments laid down during this span reveal a striking change, their layers containing far fewer large fossils than those below. The absence is not abrupt like a torn page, but gradual, as if life itself had exhaled and paused before drawing breath again. In these altered waters, only certain lineages endured. Small organisms proved most resilient, their brief life cycles allowing them to recover quickly even when conditions shifted. Microscopic plankton returned first, their tiny shells accumulating once more along the seafloor. Mollusks followed, then fishes whose remains appear in increasing numbers within younger strata. Such survivors did not restore the former world immediately. Instead, they formed the first threads of a new tapestry, delicate beginnings that spread slowly through the recovering seas. Larger animals faced greater difficulty, with food webs disrupted and environmental conditions still unsettled. Few sizable predators persisted in the earliest aftermath. Fossil assemblages from this interval often show simplified communities, where diversity remained low and ecological roles were filled by only a handful of species. It was a time of ecological reset, though the process unfolded without haste. Each generation added another layer of presence, another small return of movement to waters that had grown sparse. Geological evidence suggests that this recovery required immense stretches of time. Sedimentary sequences indicate that millions of years passed before marine ecosystems regained the richness seen before the Great Disruption. During that interval, evolutionary experimentation continued quietly. New forms appeared, some vanishing after brief spans, others establishing lineages that would persist. The oceans did not rush toward their future. They unfolded it patiently, guided by the steady interplay of adaptation and chance. Traces of this slow renewal lie preserved in stone across the world. In cliff faces and deep cores alike, paleontologists find layers where life is scarce, followed by layers where it gradually multiplies. The pattern resembles a tide advancing over a shoreline, not in a single surge, but through repeated gentle rises. Through such records, the planet reveals how resilience operates on geological scales, restoring complexity through countless small continuations rather than sudden transformation. In that prolonged quiet, the seas began again. Their surface still reflected the sky, their depths still held currents and drifting particles, yet the communities within them were newly forming, shaped by survivors and descendants rather than the vanished giants of earlier ages. Over time, motion would return, diversity would widen, and the waters would once more fill with living presence, though never in quite the same arrangement as before. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, new rulers of the water began to shape the rhythm of marine life. They did not arrive with sudden force, nor did they claim the seas through a single transformation. Instead, they spread in quiet succession, their forms refining across generations until their presence became familiar within currents that once carried very different silhouettes. These were mammals whose ancestors had long lived on land, yet whose descendants found increasing harmony within the ocean's embrace. One advantage lay within their internal warmth. Unlike reptiles, whose activity often depended upon surrounding temperature, these swimmers maintained steady body heat through metabolic processes that functioned regardless of external conditions. Such stability allowed them to travel across varied climates, from cooler regions to warmer ones, without losing strength or coordination. Their muscles remained responsive, their senses alert, and their movements fluid, even when waters shifted in temperature. Over long spans of time, this physiological independence opened habitats that might have challenged less regulated bodies. Within their skulls, another difference emerged. Fossil evidence indicates that mammalian lineages gradually developed larger brains relative to body size, with expanded regions devoted to processing sound, movement, and spatial awareness. These neural capacities supported complex perception and flexible behavior. Instead of relying solely on instinctive responses, they could adjust their actions according to changing surroundings, navigating unfamiliar territories, or pursuing new forms of prey. Such adaptability proved valuable in oceans that never remained entirely constant. Behavior itself may have played a role. Some early marine mammals show skeletal features associated with communication and group movement, suggesting lives spent at least partly in social association. Traveling in loose gatherings could offer advantages, from cooperative foraging to shared vigilance against danger. Even without direct fossilized proof of interaction, the anatomical clues hint at creatures attuned not only to their environment but to one another, capable of coordinating motion through subtle signals carried by water. Over generations, these qualities combined into a pattern of resilience. Mammalian swimmers diversified into many forms, each suited to a particular way of living, some pursuing swift prey near the surface, others searching deeper layers for nourishment. Their flexibility in diet, habitat, and behavior allowed them to persist through environmental changes that might have challenged more specialized animals. As marine ecosystems continued to evolve after earlier extinctions, these traits provided a foundation upon which new lineages could flourish. In the stone record, this transition appears not as a sharp boundary, but as a gradual shift in presence. Fossils of marine mammals become more common in younger layers, while those of older reptilian groups fade into earlier strata. The pattern suggests a quiet succession shaped by physiology, cognition, and behavior acting together across immense spans of time. Through this patient unfolding, mammals came to occupy roles once held by others, their rise guided not by sudden conquest, but by the steady advantages carried within their own living design. After the long reign of reptilian swimmers faded into the deeper pages of stone, another lineage continued its patient ascent through the oceans. Their bodies had always been present in earlier ages, moving through currents with quiet assurance, yet now their silhouettes appeared more frequently in younger sediments, their teeth scattered like small crescents of enamel across ancient seabeds. These were the sharks, inheritors of waters that had slowly changed around them. Their design differed from the vanished rulers that came before. Instead of heavy skeletons of mineralized bone, they carried frameworks of cartilage, flexible yet strong, allowing efficient motion through the sea. Their skin bore countless tiny denticles that reduced drag, guiding water smoothly along their bodies. With each sweep of the tail, they advanced with measured power, expending little energy for the distance gained. Such qualities, refined across immense spans of time, suited them well to oceans recovering from earlier upheavals. As marine ecosystems reorganized, these hunters filled roles left open by extinction. Fossil records from the Cenozoic show an increasing abundance of shark remains, indicating populations that expanded alongside the renewal of marine food webs. Fish diversified, marine mammals spread into new habitats, and within this living network, sharks moved as persistent predators, their senses tuned to faint electrical signals and distant vibrations. They did not rely on a single strategy, but occupied many ecological positions, from swift chasers of open water prey to slow cruisers near the seafloor. Among them arose the lineage, often called the megatooth sharks, a succession of species known primarily from their remarkable teeth. These fossils, sometimes larger than a human hand, reveal cutting edges adapted for slicing through flesh with clean precision. Through successive layers of rock, their forms change gradually, each species differing slightly from the last, as though evolution itself were adjusting their design with careful strokes. This lineage culminated in giants whose jaws could span astonishing widths, capable of taking sizable prey in a single bite. Such predators did not appear suddenly. Their ancestry stretches back through earlier shark forms, each generation carrying forward traits that proved effective in shifting seas. The pattern preserved in fossils suggests a quiet succession rather than abrupt replacement, a passing of ecological roles from one dominant group to another. Where marine reptiles once held the highest tiers of predation, sharks now occupied many of those positions, their success grounded in versatility and resilience. Through time, their presence became a defining feature of marine life, not as conquerors arriving from elsewhere, but as long-standing inhabitants whose moment at the summit had finally come. In the layered archives beneath the ocean floor, their teeth and vertebrae mark this transition, small, enduring signs of a lineage that rose gradually to prominence as the balance of the seas continued its slow and endless transformation. Sometimes, the most ancient stories wait inside stone until light and patience uncover them. In quiet laboratories and windswept cliffs alike, fossils continue to emerge from their long concealment, each one carrying details that earlier generations could not yet perceive. The record of marine reptiles, though millions of years old, is not finished. It grows slowly with every excavation, each new specimen adding a subtle correction or refinement to the portrait assembled from those found before. Modern tools have changed how these remains are read. High-resolution CT scanning allows researchers to look within fossilized bones without breaking them apart, revealing inner chambers, nerve canals, and growth patterns preserved in mineral form. Through such imaging, the interior architecture of skulls and vertebrae becomes visible, like hidden rooms opened after ages of darkness. These scans can show the thickness of bone walls, the arrangement of sensory passages, and even the faint traces of blood vessel pathways, details once impossible to observe without damaging the specimen itself. In rare cases, preservation extends beyond bone. Certain fossils retain impressions of skin, outlines of fins, or shadowy traces of soft tissue pressed into surrounding sediment before decay could erase them. These delicate remnants offer glimpses of texture and contour that skeletons alone cannot provide. From them, scientists infer the presence of scales, smooth skin, or subtle ridges that shaped how these animals moved through water. Each impression acts as a gentle echo of living form, a record of surfaces that vanished long ago yet left their signature behind. With every discovery comes discussion, and sometimes disagreement, about how best to interpret what is found. The arrangement of a limb, the curve of a spine, or the placement of a sensory opening may suggest different possibilities to different observers. Such debates do not weaken understanding. Instead, they refine it, guiding attention toward overlooked details and encouraging new methods of analysis. Through this process, knowledge advances gradually, shaped by evidence rather than assumption. Fresh finds continue to emerge from rock layers across the world, from desert exposures to coastal cliffs where tides wear away sediment grain by grain. Each site holds the possibility of another specimen waiting beneath the surface, its presence unknown until chance or careful search reveals it. These discoveries remind us that the ancient oceans are not entirely lost. Their inhabitants still speak through stone, their forms preserved with remarkable fidelity despite the passage of immense spans of time. Thus, the study of fossils remains an ongoing conversation between present and past, one conducted in careful observation and quiet inference. The bones resting in museums and field jackets are not final answers, but pages within a narrative still being read, their details continuing to unfold as new tools and new discoveries bring the distant ages of the sea gently back into view. Stories of great creatures from the sea have drifted through human cultures for centuries, carried in songs, carvings, and quiet tales told beside firelight. Many of these accounts describe long-bodied beings with formidable jaws or sweeping tails, figures that seem at once imaginative and strangely precise. Long before the science of paleontology took shape, such images arose from encounters with unusual bones weathering out of rock or exposed along shorelines, their forms unfamiliar, yet suggestive enough to stir the mind toward explanation. When early observers found these remains, they lacked the framework that later generations would use to understand them. A vertebra larger than a person's hand or a tooth shaped like a polished blade could appear less like evidence of a vanished animal and more like a relic from legend. Without knowledge of deep time or extinction, it was natural to interpret such objects through the language already present in culture. Thus, bones became proof of dragons, sea serpents, or other beings that seemed to belong halfway between the natural world and imagination. Across different regions, similar patterns emerged. In parts of Europe, fossilized skeletons were sometimes displayed as the remains of monsters described in folklore. In East Asia, ancient texts mention dragon bones collected from hillsides and ground for traditional remedies, long before their true origin was recognized. These interpretations varied in detail, yet shared a common impulse: the attempt to place unfamiliar forms within familiar stories. Each culture shaped its understanding according to its own symbols, transforming mineralized remains into figures that reflected local myth and meaning. Modern study has gradually clarified these mysteries. Careful excavation and comparison of fossils from many locations reveal consistent anatomical patterns, allowing scientists to reconstruct the bodies to which those bones once belonged. What might once have seemed like the fragment of a mythical beast becomes part of a skeleton whose proportions match others found continents away. Through such connections, the shapes of marine reptiles emerge not as fantasies, but as living organisms that inhabited ancient seas under natural laws. Even so, the old stories retain a quiet significance. They show how human curiosity responds when confronted with traces of a distant past, shaping explanations from imagination until evidence offers a clearer view. In this sense, the legends are not errors, but early attempts to understand, reflections of wonder inspired by objects that carried the imprint of vanished worlds. The fossils did not change, yet the meanings drawn from them evolved as knowledge deepened. Between myth and science lies a gentle continuity. Both arise from the same encounter, with ancient remains resting in stone, silent yet evocative. One speaks in symbols, the other in measurement, but each begins with the same moment of discovery, when a fragment of bone appears in the light and invites interpretation. Imagine the present oceans altered not in appearance alone, but in the underlying balance of life, as though an earlier chapter had never fully closed. In such a world, the descendants of ancient marine reptiles would still move through the currents, their forms refined by millions of additional years of evolution. Scientific modeling offers glimpses of how these seas might function, using data from fossils, climate reconstructions, and modern ecosystems to explore possibilities grounded in evidence rather than fantasy. If those reptiles had endured beyond their disappearance, they would likely occupy ecological roles now held by large marine mammals. Predatory niches near the top of the food web might include sleek reptilian hunters alongside whales rather than whales alone. Competition between these lineages would shape their behavior and distribution. Some might specialize in prey types less exploited by mammals, while others could adapt to similar diets but different depths or temperatures, dividing the ocean into overlapping territories defined by physiology and habit. Such coexistence would influence the structure of marine communities. The presence of additional large predators tends to alter prey populations, which in turn affects smaller organisms and even microscopic life. Models suggest that ecosystems containing multiple apex hunters often display complex stability, where fluctuations in one species are balanced by responses in another. In this alternate continuity, schools of fish might follow migration patterns shaped not only by mammals, but by reptilian pursuers as well, their routes tracing ancient pathways preserved through deep time. Ocean circulation and climate might also feel subtle effects. Large marine animals contribute to nutrient mixing as they travel, carrying elements from deep waters toward the surface and redistributing them through feeding and movement. If marine reptiles had persisted in significant numbers, Their migrations could add to this biological transport, slightly altering nutrient cycles that influence plankton growth. Over immense spans, even small differences in such processes can shape regional productivity and the distribution of life. The fossil record provides clues for these projections. Measurements of body size, metabolic estimates, and tooth wear patterns allow scientists to calculate how much energy these reptiles required and what kinds of prey they consumed. By comparing these figures with modern marine ecosystems, researchers can estimate how their continued presence might shift population balances. These reconstructions remain tentative, yet they rest upon measurable traits rather than speculation alone. In this imagined extension of history, the oceans would still shimmer beneath the sun and roll beneath the moon, yet their inhabitants would include a lineage that vanished from our timeline. Their movement would not replace the life we know today, but weave into it, creating a marine world layered with both familiar and ancient designs, a reminder that the course of life has always turned upon events that might easily have unfolded otherwise. Time carries no allegiance, and in its steady passage, even the most enduring rulers yield their place. The marine reptiles that once filled the oceans with their varied forms persisted across spans so vast that entire mountain ranges rose and wore away while they still swam. Their long presence might suggest permanence, yet the record preserved in stone reveals a different truth, one written not in sudden endings but in gradual transitions shaped by forces beyond any single lineage. Across geological ages, life replaces life with quiet continuity. When one group diminishes, another often expands into the spaces left behind, not through deliberate conquest but through opportunity. This pattern appears again and again in the fossil record, where successive layers show changing communities whose members differ in shape and ancestry yet occupy similar roles. The disappearance of dominant reptiles opened ecological pathways that mammals, sharks, and other creatures would later follow, each inheriting positions once held by others. Such succession reflects the adaptive nature of living systems, where resilience lies not in any single species but in the diversity of forms capable of filling a niche. The long tenure of these ancient swimmers also illustrates that duration alone offers no guarantee of continuation. For millions of years they thrived, their bodies refined for movement, hunting, and survival within their environment. Yet even such success could not shield them from shifts in climate and chemistry that altered the conditions upon which they depended. The oceans themselves changed, their temperatures, currents, and nutrient cycles influenced by events both terrestrial and celestial. When those changes crossed certain thresholds, advantages that had once ensured prosperity could become limitations instead. Climate has always acted as a subtle architect of life's possibilities. Variations in temperature, sea level, and atmospheric composition reshape habitats gradually, often unnoticed by the organisms within them until the effects accumulate. Marine reptiles lived through many fluctuations, adapting as conditions shifted, yet the final disruptions they faced proved too extensive for recovery. Their story shows how even highly specialized bodies can be vulnerable when environments transform faster than evolution can respond. From their rise and eventual absence emerges a quiet lesson about the nature of existence on a restless planet. Dominance is temporary, balance is dynamic, and survival depends upon the capacity to change alongside the world itself. The seas that once carried these creatures did not vanish when they did. They remained, ready to host new inhabitants whose forms would suit the altered conditions of later ages. Thus, the legacy of those long-vanished swimmers endures not only in fossils, but in the broader pattern they reveal. Their reign stands as a reminder that life persists through renewal rather than permanence, and that every lineage, no matter how widespread or long-lived, moves within a larger rhythm guided by time, environment, and the ever-shifting character of Earth. Far below the surface, where sunlight fades into a dim blue haze, the modern ocean continues a story older than any shoreline. In these depths, pressure presses steadily from all directions, temperatures hover near freezing, and darkness stretches without horizon. Yet, life persists, shaped by conditions that would seem unwelcoming from above. Creatures move through this quiet realm with forms adapted to its demands, their bodies carrying solutions refined through countless generations. Among them glide the present apex hunters of the deep. Some are fish with elongated bodies and jaws that hinge wide, their teeth angled backward to secure any prey encountered. Others belong to lineages of squid whose eyes gather the faintest glimmers, allowing them to sense movement where light scarcely travels. Even certain sharks descend into these layers, their movements deliberate, their senses tuned to vibrations carried through water. Each predator holds a place within a hierarchy that resembles those of earlier eras, though the inhabitants themselves differ in ancestry and design. The environment surrounding them remains one of extremes. Pressure increases steadily with depth, compressing gases and demanding structural resilience from tissues and organs. Many deep-dwelling animals possess flexible skeletons or reduced air spaces, preventing collapse under the immense weight of overlying water. Bioluminescent organs glow softly along some bodies, producing signals that may attract prey, confuse rivals, or guide encounters between members of the same species. In the absence of sunlight, such living lights form a scattered constellation drifting through darkness. Despite the passage of ages and the transformation of dominant lineages, the underlying character of the ocean retains a certain continuity. Danger has never vanished from its depths. It persists not as constant violence, but as an ever-present possibility woven into the fabric of marine existence. Predators still search, prey still evade, and survival depends upon awareness and adaptation. The forms that embody these roles change over time, yet the pattern itself endures, as steady as the tides that move unseen above. Evidence of this continuity appears when scientists compare modern ecosystems with those reconstructed from fossils. Though separated by immense spans, both reveal layered food webs, specialized hunters, and animals equipped for life under pressure and cold. The parallels suggest that while species come and go, the fundamental challenges of the deep remain consistent, shaping each generation in ways that echo those long vanished. So the ocean today, vast and shadowed in its lower reaches, is not entirely different from the seas that existed in distant ages. It is another chapter in the same unfolding narrative, inhabited now by creatures whose forms reflect present conditions, yet whose struggles and triumphs belong to a pattern as ancient as life itself. Stone keeps its memories quietly, holding them layer upon layer, as though time itself had settled into rest. Across wide regions of Earth, pale rock faces rise where ancient seas once lay, their surfaces composed of particles that drifted downward through long vanished waters. These layers formed slowly, grain settling upon grain, until sediments hardened into limestone that now stands exposed to air and sky. Within that stone lie the traces of lives that moved through those waters ages before the first human footsteps. Limestone often begins as the remains of tiny marine organisms, shells and skeletons descending gently to the seafloor after life has ended. Over immense spans, pressure binds these fragments together, turning loose sediment into solid rock. Mixed among them, sometimes revealed only when erosion uncovers a cross-section, appear the fossilized bones of larger creatures. Vertebrae, ribs, and fragments of flippers rest within the pale matrix, preserved as part of the same quiet accumulation. Their presence shows that the seafloor once supported not only drifting plankton, but entire communities of swimmers whose bodies eventually joined the sediments below. In certain coastal regions, cliffs of chalk rise in luminous walls above the shore. Chalk is a form of limestone made primarily from microscopic plates shed by ancient plankton, their countless remains compacted into soft white stone. Embedded within these deposits, scientists have discovered skeletons of marine reptiles, their outlines faintly contrasting against the lighter rock. The delicacy of chalk allows careful preparation so that bones emerge gradually under steady hands, each fragment revealed without breaking the surrounding matrix. Such discoveries transform blank stone into a record of vanished movement, a still image of creatures once carried by currents. These formations offer more than isolated fossils. They provide a sense of duration, a physical measure of how long oceans existed before present landscapes took shape. Each layer represents years beyond counting, stacked one upon another until the thickness of the rock itself becomes a scale for time. When geologists read these strata, they do so much as one might read pages in a chronicle, noting subtle changes in color, texture, and composition that mark shifts in ancient environments. Seen from a distance, a cliff of limestone or chalk may appear silent and unchanging, yet within its mass lies a record of motion, growth, and transformation extending across millions of years. The stone does not speak aloud, but it preserves with remarkable fidelity the forms and patterns of earlier ages. In this way, the planet keeps its own archive, written not in ink but in mineral layers, where the memory of ancient seas remains patiently inscribed for those who learn how to read it. Long after any single lineage has passed from the waters, the ocean continues its slow and patient work. Currents still travel their unseen paths, tides still rise and fall, and within those movements new lives take shape. The inhabitants change, yet the sea itself remains a constant presence, receiving each generation and releasing it again in time. In this way, the history of marine life unfolds as a sequence of arrivals and departures, each era distinct yet linked to those before it. Across the ages, dominance has never belonged to one form forever. Groups that once flourished gradually recede, while others expand into the spaces they leave behind. This pattern repeats with gentle persistence, not as a struggle for permanence, but as a process guided by shifting conditions. Temperature, chemistry, geography, and chance all play their part, altering habitats until different bodies are favored. Through such changes, the ocean reshapes its communities, encouraging diversity rather than constancy. Adaptation lies at the center of this quiet cycle. Every creature that enters the sea carries traits suited to the moment of its existence, features refined by ancestry and environment working together. When surroundings remain stable, those traits may serve well for long spans. When circumstances shift, survival belongs to those capable of adjustment, whether through migration, altered behavior, or gradual evolution across generations. Extinction, then, becomes not an ending alone but a transition within a larger flow, a turning of pages rather than a closing of the book. The fossil record preserves these transitions as a layered chronicle. In older strata rest the forms of animals that once moved through ancient waters, their shapes fixed in mineral stillness. Above them appear newer remains, revealing how life changed as time advanced. Each layer marks an interval in which the sea hosted different inhabitants, yet all belong to the same continuous narrative. The stones do not show emptiness between these chapters. Instead, they display succession, a steady unfolding of presence. Seen from this perspective, the ocean is never truly vacant. Even when one kind of swimmer disappears, another soon follows, shaped by conditions that favor its arrival. The surface may appear calm, the depths silent, yet within those expanses life persists, adapting to currents that have flowed since long before memory. The continuity is gentle rather than dramatic, expressed through countless small adjustments, accumulating over immense durations. So the story of the sea extends onward, not toward a final conclusion but through an ongoing passage of transformation. What once ruled has yielded, what rules now will one day yield in turn, and still the waters will move, carrying new forms into being. Beneath the shifting surface, deep time continues its quiet rhythm, and the ocean, vast and enduring, remains ready to welcome whatever life comes next.